You know, when you think of the harmonica, what comes to mind? A dusty cowboy by a campfire, right? The lonesome sound of the American West. But what if I told you that iconic sound wasn't born on the open plains or under a starry Texas sky? Nope. That little instrument's journey started thousands of miles away, across the Atlantic Ocean. It all began in the workshops of old Europe, specifically Germany and Austria, way back in the early 1820s. Long before steam engines charged across the frontier, skilled craftsmen were experimenting with tiny metal reeds, wooden combs, and bellows. They had all sorts of names for their creations: mouth harp, mouth organ, even handioline. The goal was the same: create a portable instrument you could literally breathe life into. Most historians point to a German fella named Christian Friedrich Buschmann as one of the earliest pioneers. His version wasn't quite the harmonica we play today, but it was the spark that lit the fire. Then, a guy named Joseph Richter came along and created the tuning system that would become the standard for over a century. But the real game changer was a clockmaker from Germany named Matthias Hono. Hono had a brilliant, simple idea. He realized that if he could mass-produce an instrument that was tough, affordable, and small enough to slip into a pocket, he'd have a massive hit on his hands. And he was right. By the 1850s, the Hohner Company was shipping out thousands upon thousands of and their biggest customers, Americans. Think about it. America at that time was a country of movement, of change, and of immigrants. People arriving in ports like New York and New Orleans carried these little instruments with them, tucked away in their belongings. They were a cheap souvenir, a musical tool, and for many, a small piece of home. But this is America, and things rarely stay the same for long. The harmonica quickly left the immigrant communities and spread like wildfire. It showed up in river towns, logging camps, on steamboats, and in the hands of farmhands. It was the perfect instrument for people on the move, no lessons required. Just a bit of breath and a lot of soul. So, this European creation found its way across the ocean and into the hands of wanderers, workers, and dreamers. Folks who maybe didn't have much money, but had stories to tell and songs to sing. By the time the nation began its great expansion westward, that little German instrument was already here, waiting. It was small, tough, and built for the road, just like the very people who would soon carry it into the heart of the American frontier. Let me tell you something interesting. The place where the harmonica truly became a part of American life wasn't on some dusty trail or a quiet ranch. No, it was during the American Civil War. From 1861 to 1865, a time when the nation was in turmoil. In the midst of all that conflict, both Union and Confederate soldiers often had one thing in common: a small harmonica tucked away in a pocket. They weren't professional musicians, and they certainly didn't have time for music lessons. So why the harmonica? Well, it was cheap, tough, and small enough to carry anywhere. All it needed was a little breath and a lot of loneliness to make a sound. Merchants knew this, and they'd set up shop selling harmonicas right outside the military forts. Families would send them in care packages to their loved ones on the front lines. For many soldiers, that little instrument was one of the only sources of comfort they had. If you read their diaries and letters from that time, you'll find powerful entries. Things like, "The only music we can make is with our mouth organ," or "It helps pass the long hours of the night watch." It reminds me of home. It's a recorded fact that more harmonicas were carried into Civil War camps than fiddles, banjos and guitars combined. Then, when the war finally ended, hundreds of thousands of veterans returned to their normal lives, but they brought their harmonicas with them. Some took the instrument back to the South. Others brought it with them to work on the new railroads that were connecting the country, and a whole lot of them headed west. These were tough, often scarred men, traveling with little more than a horse, a rifle, and memories they preferred not to speak about. But they also carried that harmonica in their pocket. And just like that, the sound of the harmonica walked right onto the American frontier, ready to become the soundtrack for a new chapter in the nation's history. Ever wonder what a cowboy carried in his saddlebags? Beyond the rope and the grit, there was often a tiny instrument that held the soul of the open range. Let's talk about the cowboy's pocket-sized companion, the frontier. She was a harsh teacher. You had miles of open plains, nights colder than betrayal, and days hotter than a pistol barrel. The work was endless, breaking a man's back day after day. Most cowboys were young, real young. Many were former soldiers, farm boys, ex-slaves, or immigrants looking for a chance at a new life. And not a single one of them had room for luxuries. But a harmonica, that wasn't a luxury. That was a lifeline. It weighed next to nothing. It didn't crack under the relentless heat or the choking dust. It didn't mind being dropped, kicked, or rained on. And unlike a guitar or a fiddle, you didn't need cases, spare strings, or constant tune-ups. It was the perfect instrument for a life on the move. You could play it while riding on horseback, its melody drifting across the plains. You could play it while sitting on your saddle after a long day's ride, watching the sun dip below the horizon. You could play it beside a crackling campfire, or when there wasn't any fire at all, acoustic silent company of the stars. The harmonica was always there, a constant friend in a life of uncertainty. Journals from real cattle, drives the big ones from Texas, up to Kansas Dell of cowboys, humming or playing their mouth organs to calm the longhorns at night. A soft, gentle tune could settle a restless herd just as well as a soft voice. The sound became a lullaby for the cattle, a symbol of safety in the dark. So the harmonica became an essential part of the cowboy kit, right alongside his rope, his knife, and his tobacco. Maybe he'd also have a worn picture of someone he missed, and right next to it, his harmonica. It wasn't for show. It wasn't for playing to crowds in a smoky saloon. It was for sanity. A cowboy didn't talk much, but he breathed stories into that little harp-tales of loneliness, freedom, and the wild, untamed spirit of the West. It was the soundtrack to his life, a small piece of comfort in a vast and rugged world. Picture this, partner, a herd of cattle bedded down for the night, under a sky so wide it feels like it could swallow you whole. The campfire's crackling low, just enough to keep the chill away. The smell of coffee boiling in a tin pot mixes with the dust you've been breathing all day. You finally get your boots off, lean back, and just look up at all those stars. This wasn't some Hollywood movie set. This was the real frontier. Cowboys were some of the hardest working folks you could imagine. We're talking 16-hour days. Easy, just riding, roping, watching that massive herd, and constantly chasing down strays that decided to wander off. It was tough, lonely work, and when the sun finally dipped below the horizon, that's when they'd gather around the campfire. Now, you might think they were all telling tall tales or playing cards, and some of them were, but more often than not, someone would reach into their pocket and pull out a harmonica. And that sound, it was thin and lonely, but steady. It would just carry across the dark plains like a voice looking for its way back home. If you dig into historical accounts, you'll find these cowboys played a little bit of everything. They played old hymns they remembered from church, folk tunes passed down through their families, and even melodies their Irish ancestors brought over. You'd hear songs from the Civil War, and a lot of the time, they'd just make up simple little riffs on the spot. Sometimes, that music was full of joy, celebrating another day, survived. Sometimes it was pure sorrow, thinking about loved ones far away. And sometimes it was just something to fill the vast, overwhelming silence of the plains. But here is a truth that every single ranch foreman and trail boss knew. A calm cowboy meant a calm herd. And a calm herd, well, that meant survival. It meant getting the cattle to market and getting paid. That little harmonica became the soundtrack of the cattle drive, because it was the only sound that truly fit the landscape. It was kit, it was wandering, and it was full of a deep longing, just like the men who were playing it. In our next chapter, we're going to ride beyond the ranch. We'll see how the railroads, the outlaws, the freedmen, and all the other wonders of the West helped make the harmonica a true voice of American roots music. When you picture a cowboy at the end of a long day, what do you see? Maybe a lone figure by a campfire, silhouetted against a vast, starry sky. And chances are, you hear something too. The lonely, gentle sound of a harmonica. It's an image so classic, so ingrained in our idea of the Old West, that we rarely stop to ask why. Why that specific instrument? Why not a fiddle or a guitar? The answer, it turns out, has less to do with music and more to do with survival. It's a story not just of cowboys, but of the entire American frontier. After enough nights on the trail, you'd start to notice something. The harmonica wasn't just a cowboy thing. Once you moved off the open range, that same small instrument showed up almost everywhere men worked. Mining towns, railroad camps, freight wagon, cruise canal, diggers survey, teams any place where living was rough and the pay was small. You could count on someone having a harmonica tucked into a pocket or wrapped in a piece of cloth. It wasn't a sign of being musical. It was simply the only instrument that could survive in a world built on dust, weather, and hard labor. Think about the mining camps, some of the harshest places in the West. Tents and makeshift shacks clung to unstable ground, and the clang of tools echoed long after the sun went down. This was no place for delicate instruments. A violin would warp, a guitar would crack, but the harmonica, made of metal and wood, didn't need any special care. Men who spent their days deep underground or breaking rock with hammers would often pull one out at night. They'd sit on a bunk or by a flickering lantern and play a few quiet notes. It wasn't a performance. Letters and memoirs from those mining regions mention it without any ceremony. It was just a small, steady comfort in a place where everything else was loud, dangerous, and uncertain. It was the same story with the railroad crews. These were the men building the arteries of a new nation, and the work was absolutely grueling. They laid heavy wooden ties, drove steel spikes with rhythmic swings of a sledgehammer, and hauled materials across vast stretches of land that had never even seen a wagon wheel. Most of these workers owned almost nothing beyond what they could carry in their bedroll. Yet, harmonicas kept turning up in the belongings of men from all backgrounds: German, Italian, Chinese, and American-born workers. Too, again, it wasn't about putting on a show. The instrument simply fit into lives where the only way to bring a piece of music along was to choose something that weighed almost nothing and could be carried anywhere. Even the legendary cow towns at the end of the long cattle drives were rough and temporary places. They were often thrown together in a hurry when thousands of cattle suddenly poured in from the plains. The saloons weren't always the lively, piano-banging hubs we see in movies. Some had a piano, but many didn't. Many had only a few chairs in a bar built from whatever scrap lumber the owner could find. But people still tried to make their own noise after months of silence on the trail. A harmonica was often the only instrument available. Someone would sit on a boardwalk in the quiet evening and play a few simple tunes. It was nothing dramatic, just a small moment of normal life in a place that didn't offer much stability. This need for durability and portability extended to everyone who lived a life on the move. Sheriffs, drifters, ranch hands, wagon drivers, and even outlaws all shared one thing. They traveled constantly. Their possessions were few, and whatever they owned had to be useful, durable, and light. Many of them never stayed in one place long enough to keep anything delicate. That's why, when you look at old frontier estate inventories, were just simple lists made when a man died and his belongings were sold, you see the harmonica appear again and again. It would be listed right alongside his other essential items: a plug of tobacco, a pocket knife, a comb, and maybe a handful of coins. It didn't matter whether the man had lived an honest life or bent the law. The same small, resilient instrument kept showing up. Ranch stores, the general stores of the plains, knew their customers well. They always kept harmonicas in stock because cowboys bought them regularly. They cost very little, and for many of these men, they were the only thing they owned that wasn't strictly practical. After long days of riding, roping, and watching over a restless herd of cattle, a few slow notes played in a bunkhouse helped fill the heavy silence. Trail diaries describe this in a very matter-of-fact way. Someone played a little after supper. Someone else listened while mending their gear. Sometimes, the simple tune would drift out into the night through the cracks in the wooden walls. It wasn't a concert, and it wasn't a social gathering. It was simply what happened when men lived far from any comfort and needed something gentle to close out the day. The music itself was rarely complicated. Most cowboys and other frontier workers played simple tunes they remembered from their childhood, old folk melodies, hymns, or patriotic songs they'd heard during the Civil War years. Others would just make up short, repetitive phrases, playing them over and over. The harmonica wasn't used to impress anyone. It didn't need to. Its true value came from how easily it fit into the rhythm of frontier life. Quiet, steady, small, and completely personal. Over time, The reason the harmonica became so deeply tied to the West was not because anyone set out to make it a symbol. It was a matter of pure pragmatism. It simply ended up in the hands of thousands upon thousands of people who were all living the same kind of life. Far from home, surrounded by vast empty land and ending each day with more hard work behind them than ahead. It survived nights of freezing cold and days of blistering heat. It survived being dropped, getting rained on, and rattling around for hundreds of miles in a saddlebag. But most of all, it survived loneliness. When the work was finally done and darkness settled in, a harmonica was the one thing that nearly any man could pull from his pocket to make a little music, without needing anything or anyone else. When we look back now, we often picture the West through a lens of high drama gunfights, standoffs, and epic cattle drives. But the real connection between the harmonica and that era has nothing to do with drama. It comes from something much quieter. Repetition and practicality. It was there with the miners in their drafty shacks, the cowboys by the dying embers of a fire, the railroad workers resting along the tracks, the lowmen on the move, and the drifters with nothing but the clothes on their backs. They all turned to the same little instrument for the same simple reason. It was the only music that could live the life they lived. And that is why, long after the frontier itself disappeared, the harmonica stayed so firmly linked to its memory. It was there, in the real pockets of real men on real nights, doing exactly what they needed it to do, no more and no less. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this story of the unsung hero of the West interesting, please give this video a like and subscribe for more deep dives into hidden history. See you next time.